The WillaKenzie soils are sedimentary, so those were all old ocean beds, very layered. You can still see little crustaceans when you're walking through the vineyard. 100 million years ago, if you were standing on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, you were in Idaho. So Oregon, Washington, California, it was all underwater at that time. Little crustaceans become part of the calcium carbonate in the soil. And then we have the volcanic soils. Sedimentary tends to have more tannin and darker colors. So the colors are more in the blues and the blacks. Volcanic soils are more in those cherry popping bright ruby reds.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 187. How has Oregon white wine evolved since it was first produced? Which elements make up the classic Oregon style of wine? And how do different types of soil express themselves in wine? You'll hear those tips and more in part 2 of our chat with Eugenia Keegan, a winemaker and pioneering legend in the wine industry who has some fabulous stories to share about her decades-long career. Now, if you didn't catch part 1 last week, that's okay. After you listen to this one, go back and take a listen to that one. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show with the continuing story of publishing my new wine memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, I've been chatting with my publisher, and we've decided to add the word defamation to the subtitle because the current one doesn't allude to that part of the book, nor the online attack. So now it's Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Depression, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much. Yes, my subtitle is brought to you by the letter D. The extra part that I talked about last week, with a new taste for life, doesn't really fit in at the tail end, unless I, want the subtitle to be a book itself. As always, though, let me know what you think. I'm working on the new section of my website that'll be dedicated to the book. It requires thinking ahead about various resources I want to offer to readers. This includes bonuses for those who pre-order the book as soon as it goes on sale. I'm going to share my ideas with you now for those, but I'd love to hear what you think of them. Any favorites, any ones that maybe aren't of interest, and if you have any others to suggest, please. But first, I should probably preface this by answering the question, why would you even want to order more than one copy of the book? Well, of course, I have 6 very good reasons. Though if you think of others, let me know. Number 1, friends and family. Birthday and holiday shopping done. Number 2, clients. Create a book and bottle gift set to say thank you. Number 3, wine and book clubs. Buy copies as a group to qualify for the bonuses. Number 4, employees and colleagues. To raise awareness of gender inequity and sexism in the workplace. Number 5, to sell them at your place of business. And number 6, worthy causes. Donate to culinary and wine schools, free little libraries, and your local library. I actually just thought of another one. It was suggested to me. So, number 7, young men and young women in your life. Give them a copy of this so they can be aware of issues in the workplace before they get there. Perhaps also they're considering a career in the wine or hospitality industry. This book will be an eye-opener for them. So I'm thinking that those who pre-order 1 to 4 copies will get the following. Number 1, an exclusive online live tasting with yours truly, where we taste wines from the book together. And you can easily purchase those wines or the substitutes I'll recommend in a custom shopping list for you. I'll share the stories behind the wines and the book, read a few of my favorite passages, plus you can ask me anything during our open Q&A session at the end. Number 2, personally autographed book plates for every book you get. These are beautifully designed, and I'll personally sign them to you and your friends or family. They'll be physically mailed to you so that you can affix them inside the front page to personalize your gift book or donations to schools and libraries. Number 3, the Wine Witch Wine and Book Club Guide, discussion and thought-provoking questions for each section of the book that will help you bring your story to mine. Even if you don't have an official book club or a wine club, these questions in the guide will help you dig in even deeper into the issues that are raised in the book for yourself or just in discussion with a friend. Number 4, 6 wine and food pairing templates, a set of 6 templates for every major food group: vegetarian, seafood, chicken, beef, pasta, and chocolate. Very major food group. Access them on any device or print them out as a handy reference. Number 5, a customized music playlist that includes songs mentioned in the book, plus bonus tracks I've handpicked for you. These tunes help me to stay strong through my divorce and depression, and then through the writing of this book. Dance it out. Those who pre-order 5 or more copies get all the bonuses I just mentioned, plus, a personalized video for you. I get a lot of requests for personalized videos for birthdays or graduations or other special occasions. So send me a couple bullet points and I'll put together a 2 to 3 minute video just for you or for the person you asked me to address in the video, wishing them well and sharing some tips that will help them enjoy the wines they love even more. Perhaps the bottle you give them for the special occasion. I can even recommend that bottle for the special occasion if you let me know a little bit about their tastes. Number 2, the lost chapters. There are whole sections that I wrote for this book that ended up being edited out, not because they weren't any good, but because keeping the book tight is an editor's job. But the good news is that I still have the material and it's included in this second bonus. Number 3, exclusive audio interviews with the main characters. What's happened since with the people in the book, including Roger, aka now Daniel, Cameron, and my mom. What's changed in their lives in the past 10 years since the story took place? What are their perceptions of the book and how they're portrayed in it? What kind of memoir would they write if they wanted to? And how would they portray me? Haha. Number 4, Wine Witch screensavers. I've designed 12 stunning special edition backgrounds for your desktop, laptop, or mobile with quotes from the book. You can choose your favorite or rotate them for every month of the year. Number 5, an online video wine and food pairing mini course. Food and wine pairing is my jam. And by the way, there's a wine for jam. 5 video modules that you can binge watch, Netflix style, in an evening, or spread them out at your own pace because you'll get lifetime access to this course. I'll take you through the key pairing principles to deepen your pleasure with every glass and bite. Number 5, a writer's workshop. 3 out of 5 people want to write a book. The other 2 are curious about the process, so say various studies. Even if that's not you, you could always gift this workshop to somebody else. I'll dive into my own journey with writing 3 books, insights into writing, getting an agent and a publisher, and marketing a book. All right, that's all of them that I've sort of brainstormed. But again, I'd love to hear your ideas. What do you like? Not so much. Something I've missed. I also want to give some VIP bonuses to those who order 50 or more copies for a group. But I haven't even come up with those yet, so let me know. All right. I'll share one beta reader review with you now from Sue Slaskari in Rochester, New York. Quote, here's a woman who stands by her principles. She's faced her demons and found her power. Engaging writing, thoughtful explanations of before and after a personal crisis and career crisis. Enjoyable to read the struggles which I could relate to and the eventual strengths gleaned from difficult times. I admire her frankness in describing her emotions through these difficult earthquakes, divorce, depression caused by career assassination, and drinking. I like the interplay of career and home life. The family relationships opening some parts were appealing and reminded me that this is a memoir, a personal story. Both led gently, or not, into the chapters to come. I was pleased to be informed on the behind the scenes of wine reviewing. Wow, I learned a lot. I also felt engaged with the underlying factor of misogyny in the time period in her profession. Not fun to write about, but necessary to wake women up to this predatory behavior. I was also interested in the additional history of hunting witches. I was silently cheering the narrator's strength and commitment to pursue what needs to be named, period. Her third book was humorous and serious. The quotations were pleasing to me as someone who used quotations to begin many college papers. I loved that she did Highland dancing, wishing her well with this noble telling of her story. Thank you, Sue. I've posted a link to a blog post called Diary of a Book Launch in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/187. This is where I share more behind-the-scenes stories about the journey of taking this memoir from idea to publication. If you want a more intimate insider seat beside me on this journey, please let me know you'd like to become a beta reader and get a sneak peek at the manuscript. Email me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. Okay, on with the show. So when many people hear about Jackson Family Estates, of course, they think of the flagship brand and a particular wine, Kendall-Jackson Chardonnay. Does that help or hurt the company?
Yeah, it depends on where you are, of course. We make a La Crema Willamette Valley. And when you're showing that wine, people may not know Willamette Valley or Oregon, but they know La Crema. And they're like, oh, I love La Crema. It's my absolutely most favorite wine. Well, that's a great way for me to be able to introduce Willamette Valley to those people because they're already predisposed to love La Crema. But I think that one of the things we've learned is that one of my staff said this once, and they said, when they don't know who we really are, they call us Kendall-Jackson. Because in fact, that's a brand. We have 48 wineries around the world. Right, a lot of brands. But if they call us Jackson Family Wines, then they actually understand what we're doing. And I thought that was a very astute observation from this young staff member, that if they want to pigeonhole us into that one brand, and to your point, that one wine, VR Reserve, Vintner's Reserve, then they sort of reference us that way. But once they really understand that this is a fine wine company with estates all over the world, and our goal is always to make the very best wine, period. We're so quality driven. And I think once people understand that, there's a new level of respect for what we do. And let's never forget that it's that one SKU, Kendall-Jackson Vintner Reserve, and that is the economic engine of this company. And that one SKU, I drink it when I'm out and I kiss the bottle and I thank it, because that's the SKU and that brand, Kendall-Jackson, that allows us to do all of these other incredible small boutique wineries that we do.
Wow, you're echoing some sentiments. I was just chatting with Stevie Kim, who runs Vinitaly, and she said Prosecco is the engine of Italian wine. It's like you can turn your nose up at it, and there's some great Proseccos too, but it actually is the entry point. It's the economic engine of Italy. All right. So why doesn't Oregon have more Chardonnay?
Interestingly enough, when Oregon first planted itself, there were 3 varieties, Pinot Noir, of course, and Riesling and Chardonnay. And Riesling, of course, has gone the sad way of the marketplace, which is somewhat confused about what it is, or it's found its niches. You certainly know that. And Chardonnay was kind of interesting, and it was a combination. And we often reference the fact that we didn't have the right clonal material. Chardonnay and Pinot clonal material was brought up from California, and the Pinot translated excellently, moved up here, did a beautiful job, as we know. And they were the 2 clones, Wädenswil and Pommard. And then we've expanded Burgundian selections from there. But the Chardonnay that came out, it didn't really ripen. So you would bring in Pinot, and 2, 3, 4 weeks later, the Chardonnay would still be sitting out there not ripe. And it was actually David who was overworking in Burgundy and noticed that not only did Chardonnay and Pinot Noir ripen together, Chardonnay often came into the winery first. So clearly there was something, misaligned in Oregon. So that's when the first effort to get new clonal materials started, that David had brought into Oregon State and quarantined through their plant importation program. But there was another part of the story that's super important. And what's so ironic about it is it's all about Kendall-Jackson Vintner Reserve Chardonnay, because that became the number 1 Chardonnay in the country. And I think 30 years later, it still is, which is just the most incredible statement about the wine quality, right to begin with. And then, of course, the people who sell it. But the wine quality has to be there to do that. And that was the de facto style of New World Chardonnay. It created as the number 1 and as the one that everyone was drinking. That was New World Chardonnay. Well, we can't make that in Oregon. then, now, ever. Climate change, warming, doesn't matter. That is not a style of Chardonnay that we can actually produce here in Oregon. So a combination of us learning how to make, sort of starting over with the whole concept, new clonal material, new concept, but this came hand in hand with the gatekeepers who also have moved away from that style of Chardonnay. So it's certainly an entry-level style of Chardonnay, but when you get up to these lists that are having, $100 bottles of wine, $200 bottles of wine, that style has evolved. And there is much more interest in wines that have less alcohol, are a little less flavor forward, again, perhaps more complementary with food.
And what do you mean by gatekeepers? You mean the old critics who love to give high scores to big
No,
wines?
really the buyers, the trade
Oh,
that
the
buys.
buyers.
And of
Okay.
course, they've moved a
Okay.
generation.
Right. Sure.
Right. So we're not selling wine in a restaurant in New York to the same person that we did 30 years ago. So that buyer has evolved. And they too, of course, have access to a world of wine. And there is an evolution in wine style and what they want to buy and put on their list. And that's also gone hand in hand with Oregon Chardonnay. So now I think it's 7 or 8% of the planting, whereas Pinot Noir is 65% or something. So you can see how much distance there is. But there is a lot of Chardonnay being planted, and Chardonnay is a major focus of the community in terms of wine quality and wine sales.
And would Pinot Gris make up the rest of the difference?
Yeah, still a lot of Pinot Gris. It's fading, and people, of course, always ask why, and why aren't we doing other white wines? And it's all about economics. You can't sell a Gris for more than $20 a bottle, and at that price, you can't afford to grow grapes and make wine in Oregon.
Wow. Is that of Pinot Grigio's image of being sort of low-priced wines? Gris gets sort of clumped in there with the Pinot Grigio?
Actually, all white wines, you think about it, Chenin Blanc, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, they all have sort of this $20 plateau. There are a few that are out there in, a different world from producers that are famous for that. You could get the Didio Silex Sauvignon Blanc's going to cost you $100, but there's only 2 of those, and then there's 102 that are $18 and $15, and so it's really Chardonnay is really the only white wine that allows you to sell it for $35 to $50. So it's really an economic thing. We have a short growing season, and it only allows us to ripen a certain number of tons per acre. That's right around 3 tons per acre. And so the economics of that really forces us into these more expensive wines.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, you've done your job. You're making me thirsty. Let's taste.
Me too. Now that you said that, I was just thinking that. I'm like, it's time for
Let's get to
it's
the
time for a
wine.
glass of wine.
What do you have there with you today?
I have 2 wines. So the first one I have is the WillaKenzie Estate, and this is estate bottling. We do 4 or 5 single terroir or single site bottlings that are sold in the tasting room. But this is the statement of literally the whole estate, and it's 140 planted acres, planted in the early 90s by Bernie and Ronnie Lacroute. Bernie is a Burgundian, and he co-founded Sun Microsystems. He was the technical side, and the other guy was a marketing guy. So he didn't come without some appropriate financial wherewithal. And he
Yep.
bought this 400-acre parcel, and it's like a little piece of Burgundy. And it has 2 ridges that run through it. And so you have all sorts of aspects and elevations. It's a beautiful piece of property. And we bought it in October of 16 and brought in Eric Kramer, who had been at Domaine Serene for 6 years. And before that was actually the assistant winemaker at Adelsheim, very incestuous.
Ah.
So he's been making the wine since the 17 vintage. And this is the 19. And 19, it was a gorgeous vintage. We had warm vintage after warm vintage, 2012 through 18 were all pretty warm vintages. It is interesting to note, though, the coldest vintage in history in Oregon was 2010, not that long ago. And 2011 was the latest vintage ever. We actually finished picking on Thanksgiving weekend. So for us, it was quite late. Now people in Ontario your Ontario growers are giggling because they often pick in November. But for us, that's quite late. But 19, we had was a much cooler spring. It was a cooler summer. We tend to measure days over 90, and a lot of days would be 10, and this had no days over 90. So very cool summer and cool right into September. And then we had 4 rain events between the end of August and the end of September. So we ended up with these wines that are a little bit more what we would call classic Oregon, real loads of fresh fruit, lots of acid, really super elegant, but with a lot of muscle in the mid palate.
Huh. Wow. Okay. And 2019, was 2020 warm for you?
2020 was actually becoming what we said. I wrote on the Sunday of Memorial Day weekend an email to all of my winemakers because we were going to start our major picking. We had already picked for sparkling at that point in time. And we were about to kick off what was going to be, a vintage of the century. We had complication had set, so Mother Nature had already trimmed the crop by a third. We didn't have to go in and do any manual trimming. And we were set up for heaven. We were all just ready to go. And for those of us who lived through it, on Monday evening at 7 o'clock, we had a 100-year wind event, and the winds that all come in from the west, right here on the Pacific Ocean, did some sort of bizarre flip around and blew in from the east and blew in the smoke from the fires that were in the southeast of Oregon and blanketed us in a layer of smoke that was, very oppressive.
Ugh.
And
Ugh.
it had a very negative effect on a great deal of the crop.
Sure. My goodness. Okay. Well, back to that
Yeah,
2019.
thank you
I'll
so
let you
much.
taste.
Yeah, or 21.
Yeah.
We'll move right on to 21.
Okay.
But
We
yeah, we
just
were not bottling
elide
Pinot Noir
over.
in 2020.
What do you get from this WillaKenzie Pinot when you taste it? I'll let you do your thing there.
WillaKenzie is on sedimentary soils. We have 3 soil types here, 2 that are really dominant. The WillaKenzie soil series, which are sedimentary. So those were all old, ocean beds, very layered. You can still see little crustaceans, when you're walking through the vineyard. And if you think about it, 100 million years ago, if you were standing on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, you were in Idaho. So Oregon, Washington, California, it was all underwater at that time. So we have these, you just layer and layer and layer the waters as they move and rush around. And then, of course, all the little crustaceans that die, little vertebrae that die, that become part of the calcium carbonate in the soil. And then we have the volcanic soils, the Jory soils. And so you get 2, and they express themselves very, very differently in the wine. So this is sedimentary, and sedimentary tends to have more tannin and darker color. So the colors are more in the blues and the blacks. Volcanic soils are more in those cherry popping bright ruby reds.
And why is that? What is sedimentary soil doing to create that effect?
That's the stuff we don't know, Natalie, and that's what's so fun about what we do. We have all sorts of theories about what it does, but the truth is we don't know. And I read something the other day where somebody said soil has no effect on the resulting wine. And I'm like, oh, please. I said, I get it that we don't know exactly why, but you know that you can take the same stick and put it in the ground here and go 10 miles and put it in the ground there and treat it the same, and you're not going to get the same wine. We know that. And we know it has to do with the soil and obviously the climate. But if you get inside the Willamette Valley, you have little marginal climate variations, but we have pretty much a homogeneous climate environment. So the soil is definitely doing something. And most people start with Willamette Valley wines. And so they're usually a mixture of the 2 soils. So this lesson is challenging if you have a Willamette Valley blend. But if you have wines that are from 100% from those soil types, it's night and day. And I was at the Four Graces for a while, and we had a vineyard at each soil type and made a single vineyard site wine from each. And I loved it because I could put them side by side, and all you had to do was look at them and you could see the difference. And then, the taste and the smell and everything followed through. So you get a lot of black fruits, blue fruits, you get more of the tobacco, cocoa, some of that. Whereas you really, with the volcanic soils, you really lean up into those fresh berries and high tone, sort of like, I think of these things in musical ways all the time. And I always think of sedimentary soils as all the bass notes, get all the cellos and the violas.
Yeah.
And when you get over to volcanic soils, you have the violins, the very elegant high tone, very refined tannins. So this wine is very, very representative of its soil type. So it's the tannins, though, of course, are very refined. Eric's a very mature winemaker and has been around a very long time and understands how to manage tannins in the wines. So there's very fruit forward driven. You get all the way into the cassis and the blackberry and the blueberry. If you go into cherry, it's, wild cherry. But those cherry and strawberry are really for the other soil types. And then quite a bit of tannin, very robust in the mid palate, and very long finish, lots of acid. 19 had a lot of nice acid, natural acid, really good.
Okay. I never thought of Oregon Pinot, any of them, as having a lot of tannin. I always think of it just very smooth, but that's a generalization, of course. But if you were to compare now the WillaKenzie with the Penner Ash, is the Penner Ash is that on volcanic soil?
Penner ash is really, I'm going to pour that, but first I'm going to do this for the
Yes, yes,
commercial.
let's see the bottle. And we will put links to these wines in the show notes too, for those who are listening and want to
Thank
know
you.
about these. Yes, for sure.
So this is from the Pinot Noir estate, and it's a small vineyard. It's only 14 acres right there at the winery. And these are both in Yamhill Carlton. And Yamhill Carlton is known for its sedimentary soils, but there's a very little piece of it where there is this uplift, and in that uplift comes up some volcanic soil. And so there's a little tiny patch behind the winery. It's actually volcanic. And so this is the estate bottling, and it's a blend of the two, which is highly unusual in estate bottling. Usually you're confined to one soil type or the other, particularly on a small vineyard. And this is also the 19. I wanted to do apples and apples in that regard. But the Penner Ash style is really amazing. So Lynn Penner Ash and her husband Ron founded this winery 20 years ago. And just like the LeCroutes, they were ready to retire, although Lynn and Ron are quite a bit younger than Ronnie and Bernie, but they're big outdoor adventurers. Their goal right now is to paddle the 100 lakes of Oregon, or these kinds of things. And all their Instagram, they're all outdoors doing stuff. But their kids wanted nothing to do with the winery. And the LeCroute kids wanted nothing to do with the winery. So it was for sale. And we were the fortunate people that bought it. And Lynn and Ron built an extremely successful business. And Lynn's the winemaker. And her style is really, it's really lush. It's really lush and layered. And she pushes that mid palate so that it's very full in the middle. It's really velvety. Velvet is the thing that I always think of when I drink these wines. So very fruit forward, but also very plush in the mid palate.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering why you had chosen that one second. But if it's more expressive or has more lush fruit, I can see why you would taste it second after the one that had perhaps a bit more firm tannins.
It was a hard choice. When I looked at them this morning, it was not an obvious choice. I kind of went back and forth and said, well, I'll do it this way. Yeah, it wasn't a clear choice.
Okay. That's really interesting. And I read somewhere you said that, like, when we think of a full-bodied wine, we often think of it as having high alcohol, and certainly the two can be correlated. But you've also commented that wine can be full-bodied based on tannin and acidity. In other words, its structure rather than alcohol. What does that mean? How do we understand that?
Yeah, alcohol is a real easy way to lift up wine. I mean, it's heavy, it has weight, it has glycerol, it has real weight. That's what causes the legs on your glass is that
Right.
alcohol.
Those tears that dripping down the side.
Right. And the alcohol is so heavy that it goes down the side of the glass slowly, whereas water is so light that it goes down the glass quickly. And that's what creates the dynamic between those two lines. And it's easy to build body with alcohol and oak, right? It's really easy. But we can't get those alcohols here. If you wait that long for the alcohol, you're not going to want to drink those wines. They're going to be some place between prune juice and jam. So they're going to lose all of their elegance. And it's also important to, in a warmer climate, you can use tannin to build up a wine as opposed to acid. So if you taste wine from warm regions, you should taste very critically. And if you think that the back end is uplifted, think about whether or not it's uplifted through the tannin or through acid. Because in warm climates, they often use tannin because there is no acid. It's fired away in the heat of the day and the night. So it's much more difficult to build the body of these wines through the grape growing and the winemaking process. And it's also very important then to find the balance. So when I make wine and I blend wine, I always start with the middle of the wine. What's the body of the wine, the mouthfeel, the texture, the mid palate? And then I build the front and the back end. We don't have to worry about getting fruit in Oregon. We have very fruit-forward, fruit-driven wines. So you can pull that in to support how much fruit you need, and then you can pull in the back end, the structure, the acid, and the tannin. But what you're really trying to do is come up with this seamless wine. So if you have more fruit and more tannin than you have body, It's your job as a winemaker to pull the front and the back end, restrain them, because then they're going to be out of balance and you're going to have a hole in the middle of the wine, like that donut.
So the fruit being the front end of the wine, so to speak, and the tannin being the back, and then so that's balance, trying to pull them together. Okay,
Pulling that all
interesting.
together. And so some of this can be done by respecting what body you have and then building the wine to create a seamless wine. And so getting body through winemaking is really a lot of it's about gentle handling, because it's like food, and the more you handle it and toss it around, the less fresh it is. You break down literally the cell walls of the berry. So, we talk about gravity feed and gentle handling, and that's part of what that's about.
Huh, that's fascinating. It's almost like over kneading the dough or whatever, breaking down the
Breaking down the glutens, it's exactly what it is. And you can knead your dough to death. You can knead your dough to the point where it no longer rises because you've changed the molecular structure of those glutens.
you've over manipulated it. That makes sense to me for the first time, really, about this whole low intervention. Don't over knead your dough. That makes so much sense. Okay, cool. And do you have an ideal setting for drinking a glass of wine? I'm sure it changes, but is there a special place you love to drink these wines?
I always have a wine fantasy, and it's sitting outside next to the sea on a warm afternoon with a glass of, rosé or white wine. And it's more about the sunshine and the sense of not having to do anything. It's that sense of complete relaxation, I think, is what really attracts me. But my first glass of wine every day is a celebration every time. Whether it's at 4 o'clock or 7 o'clock, doesn't matter. It's like the break from the workday to personal time to family time to relaxation. And it really, shifts the day for me. I take my boots off when I come in the house, and people always think they have to take their shoes off. And it's like, no, that's more for me, right? When I walk in the door, I take my boots off, put my slippers on. I'm at home now.
The mental transition, yeah.
Yeah, it's my own personal way of transitioning, particularly when you work at home.
Sure, sure. I get that. So you have a glass of wine every day?
Oh, yeah, unless I'm not feeling well. Yeah. With dinner, yeah. I mean, maybe occasionally you'd have a beer if you were having a certain kind of food, but we have a different bottle of wine every night at dinner, basically.
Interesting, interesting. And I know it's your business and you have to taste wine. Tasting is different, of course, from drinking. But I just have to ask, as a woman, do you ever worry about wine consumption? Even, the restrictions are so, and I know you're not a doctor either, but the restrictions of just, one glass a day is it, like 7 drinks a week. Do you ever think about that?
Oh, yeah, I think about it all the time. But I'm in great health. I see all sorts of people. I watched that interview that Marvin Shanken did with Ernest Gallo, and 90 years old, and asked about drinking wine. And he said, I drink 2 glasses of wine every day, one at lunch, one at dinner. And, he lived to be 97. Andrei Chelichev drank wine every day, lived to be 96. Look at all those old French people. Look at all those old Italian people. So, I think it's moderation, and I think it's moderation in everything. I also think that wine is such an appropriate companion with food, that if you're drinking while you're eating and you're not over consuming, and you get up after dinner and you can go off and do creative and constructive things, for me, I'm personally fine with it. And I think each person has to find their own balance of food and exercise and everything when they're trying to navigate this world.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a good way to put it. Good internal gauge. We're into the short questions, quick answers. I love this conversation. Is there something that you believe about wine that others would strongly disagree with you about that?
Not that I can think of. I'm the kind of gal that puts ice in her white wine when she wants it colder. So,
Well, that would be
yeah,
something.
yeah. So I'm pretty relaxed on things like I don't think that there's any required way of doing these things. So I can't think of something unless somebody said life is better without wine. I might have to really take that one to the mat, because I think life is better with wine.
Won't get any arguments here. What's the strangest or oddest wine pairing that you've ever had? And perhaps it worked and you were surprised that it worked.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I guess I'm not caught up in pairings. I do notice when things don't work, and I do notice when things really, really work. Last night we had guacamole, and we had this very unusual wine from southern Sicily that we thought wouldn't go with anything. And it was perfect with guacamole. And, it was like, well, that really worked. Why? But I'm not too much of a stickler on that. I'm more concerned about the quality of the wine and the quality of the food independently. If the wine's not good, I'll just go throw it out and open a different bottle of wine. I won't suffer bad food and I won't suffer bad wine. But I'll try it all together.
Good advice. Do you have a favorite wine book?
It's kind of funny. I'm so old and we started so long ago. None of these books were really written at the time. And even doing your internships, you couldn't do your internship in California. You had to go to Burgundy because there just weren't any wineries to go, intern in. So the books were written after I was in the industry, but there have been some publications like the Champagne book that Peter Liam has done. That thing, if you want to understand the world of champagne and sparkling winemaking, it's just brilliant. I know all of my colleagues, my younger colleagues, love Karen McNeil's Wine Bible. They all read it. They all learned from it. Of course, I happen to love Karen McNeil because it's so.
I'm a fan as
yeah,
well.
I mean, she's so easy to like, but they swear by that book. The big Jancis Robinson book that came out with every grape variety for total geeky nerds like David and me, that is a book, we're in heaven in that book. So there's a lot of really great. I love Jasper Morris's Burgundy book. He has a new edition out. So, but in the end, you only learn about wine by tasting.
Yes.
You can read all you want and you can understand the maps and how far it is from Nantes to Tours and all that other stuff. But if you don't taste wine, it's like food. It's so similar, but you have to eat every day. And you started eating the minute you were, popped out. So we feel comfortable eating and making comments about food and having opinions about food. And then we hesitate about wine. It's the same thing. Taste, 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 taste. And I always say that if you put 10 wines in front of 10 pros and 10 amateurs, they'll rank them the same. The professionals will know why this wine is really good, why this wine is really bad. And the amateur may not, but you know what tastes good and you know what doesn't taste good. So that was my very quick answer. Not.
I love that.
I just say, layman, trust your palate. You know what good music sounds like, and you don't have to be a musician. You don't have to be a chef to know what good food tastes like, et cetera, et cetera.
Cool. Okay, last one. If you could share a bottle of wine with anyone, living or dead, who would that be? And which wine would you open?
It would either be probably Thomas Jefferson or Bob Mondavi. And I've shared many, many wines with Bob Mondavi, so I don't know why I need to bring him back. I just loved him so much. And he taught me so much. And he was such an incredible mentor for me. And if it was Bob Mondavi, it would definitely be a Pinot Noir, because without him making that first 85 Pinot Noir that set the world on fire, that, oh my gosh, the New World can do this, followed shortly by the Domaine Drouin, Oregon, that was done up from Oregon, where it was like, oh, Oregon can do this. And I would want Bob to see how far Pinot had come and that we were making absolutely world-class wines. And everybody would acknowledge that. And with Tom Jefferson, I have a couple little vineyards in France, and they're down in Maury. And Maury was known then for sweet wines, Grenache made into sweet wines. And of course, now there's still some sweet wines made there, but it's mostly table wine. But I would love to share some Maury table wine with him, because if you go to Monticello and you look at his cellar book, he has wines, sweet Grenache coming in from Maury. And I'd love to show him what's happened in the incredible little town of Maury, and that they've continued to make wine and evolve with wine.
Oh, I love those stories, and I love that you're keeping the men up to date.
Yeah, well, they need that, they fall behind pretty easily.
Oh, Eugenia, this is wonderful. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to mention?
One thing, you had a question that was, if you had a billboard in Toronto, what would you put on it? And I really do, because I would put on it, drink homegrown, drink Ontario VQA wines.
Well said.
Yeah.
That is great. Yeah.
It is so important to embrace your regional wine community. And I want every person in Ontario that's of age, which I think is only 19 for you people, starting young up there. I want everyone to go out and buy an Ontario VQA wine this next weekend. Support your local industry, please.
That is great. Bloom where you're planted. Oh my gosh.
Beautifully said.
You're right. We take for, well, the Bible said it first, but still, it is good to embrace what's in your backyard. Eugenia, where can we find you or your wines online? I suppose each of the wineries has its own website, but any other details you want to share along that line?
Yeah, each of the wineries has their own website, of course. And then Jackson Family has, it's called yourwinestore.com. And I think everything that Jackson Family makes is available there, which is really great because we have some extraordinary wines in our portfolio. And the wines I chose today, both of these brands are available at the LCBO, not necessarily these very specific vintages that I've called out, but these brands are there, which is why I brought them. And I can be found at first name dot last name at jfwmail.com. I'm happy to take any follow-up questions or comments anytime.
Oh, that's terrific. We'll put all those links in the show notes. Eugenia, thank you so much for this. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I love your stories. I love your insights. It's really helped me, and I'm sure the listeners will just really appreciate it as well. So thank you.
Well, Natalie, thank you. I have wanted to do this for a long time. I've read you for a long time, and now I have had an hour of personal time with you. So thank you so much for inviting me here today.
All right. Well, we'll have to continue this chat someday in person soon, I hope.
Yeah. Shut the recorders off. Turn off the, yeah, great.
That's great. All right. I'll say bye for now, Eugenia.
Great. Thanks, Natalie. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Eugenia. Here are my takeaways. Number one, we hear so much about Oregon Pinot Noir, so I was really fascinated with how Oregon white wine has evolved since it was first produced. Number two, Eugenia offers a great explanation of which elements make up the classic Oregon style of wine. And number three, I also enjoyed learning how different types of soils express themselves in wine. In the show notes, you'll find my email contact, the full transcript of my conversation with Eugenia, links to her website, and where you can find the live stream video version of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. You'll also find a link to my free online class called 5 Food and Wine Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/187. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or would like to be a beta reader of my new memoir at natalie@nataliemclean.com. You won't want to miss next week when I chat with Mike Viseth, the wine economist who has just published a new book called Wine Wars 2, The Global Battle for the Soul of Wine. In the meantime, if you missed episode 64, go back and take a listen. I chat about Mike with his previous book, Around the World in 80 Wines. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
I learned that there was such a thing as a wine economist from a famous winemaker. My wife Sue and I were newlyweds, and it was so long ago that people without a lot of money could take a budget vacation in Napa Valley. On the way back in the last day, we were driving up the Silverado Trail, and I saw this name. If I knew more about wines then, that I would have recognized that it was the name of a winery that was kind of famous for that Judgment of Paris that had gone on before. So we pulled in for one last tasting, and he pulled out the corks and poured the bottles, and we began to talk. He learned that I was an economist. Suddenly, he began to ask me very serious questions. He wanted to know about inflation rates, because they were moving up, and interest rates. And it really made a difference to him because his business involved a lot of capital investment, involved a lot of time for the vineyards, for the agent. He really wanted to know when these wines were ready. Would consumers be there? Be a good situation to sell them.
If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wines and stories we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a zesty Oregon Pinot Gris or Chardonnay. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.